I'll order my Uber when I get outside. I'm afraid if I stay here. Yeah, I need to got a refresher. I know.
I really can't see that.
Okay. Welcome everyone. I think you all know me. I'm the Dean and the George Schultz Professor here. This is our first Distinguished Speaker Series event for the spring quarter. Great to do it in person. So the DSS is sort of a long-standing booth tradition. We bring in leaders from business, from the community, from the government to just talk about their life, their careers, the insights and experience that they've had. And we've had some great alums come back and do it. Tom Ricketts came back and did it. Mark Hoplamazian, from Hyatt. Howard Marks most recently kind of came back. So it's wonderful to have the two of you. I'm just going to do a brief bio and then launch right in. So we're thrilled to have Mark Leavitt, our alum here, along with Danny Meyer. So Mark is co-founder and managing partner of Enlightened Hospitality Investments. And we're going to ask him what that is exactly in a bit. And he's actively involved in all their portfolio companies, many of which you would know, Salt and Straw, Goldbelly, Oats Overnight. Is this true, Slutty Vegan?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
we need to ask you about that. He's been included in Restaurant News' top 50 technology power list about technology innovation in the industry. And Mark is also a longtime member of the Booth Advisory Council, for which we're really grateful. Danny Meyer, whom you all know as well, co-founder and managing partner of Enlightened Hospitality. I'm going to ask him about his family life in a bit. But in 1985, at the age of 27, he opened his first restaurant, Union Square Cafe, and that launched sort of a lifelong career in hospitality. 30 years later, USAG includes Gramercy Tavern, The Modern, fantastic restaurant at the Museum of Modern Art, just to name a few. And they also founded together Shake Shack, I think all of you know about. So Danny has been recognized with the Julia Child Award, the Time 100 Most Influential People list, the Aspen Institute Award in Civic Leadership, and his restaurants have won an unprecedented 28 James Beard Award. All of you are eating lunch today with cookies from Chip City, which is one of their portfolio companies.
We did not make your lunch.
We did not make your lunch.
Make sure you all know that.
Good to
Sure, it's
know.
delicious, but we don't get any of the credit.
Special thanks to Danny and Mark for signing copies of the book, Setting the Table, The Transforming Power of Hospitality in Business. So please, first give a warm welcome to Mark Leavitt. An alum, but he also has other family members who are alums. So maybe I'll ask them just to briefly state their connection to Chicago.
Sure. So my daughter was an undergrad here, graduated in 16. She went to the dark side after being a Lazard investor and went to HBS instead of coming back here. But despite that, we hired her and she works with us now. My son was a 22 grad from Booth and loved it. He graduated the same year from business school, and I always say I think he got a way better education.
And you have a connection to the university people might not know about. So
Yeah, my mom was originally from Chicago, and her father, my grandfather, was a very, very proud member of this community. And in fact, I believe there's a school named for him called the Harris School of Public Policy. They were on campus. His name was Irving Harris. And I'll tell you guys a story that I would not tell anywhere else. And that is that I had a very undistinguished high school career. I applied to only 3 colleges. And on the day that I got my envelopes back, I was rejected at 2 of them and waitlisted at 1 of them. I was in nowhere. And my grandfather caught wind of that and he said, it's very simple. You're going to go to the University of Chicago then. And my life would have turned out very differently. I said, I can't do that. I've got to do this on my own merits. And so I wrote one of the best letters of my life at Trinity College, where I was waitlisted, and got into Trinity. If I had not done that, I would not be sitting here because I never would have met Mark, who was my roommate. So sometimes the missteps are the best opportunities, and I think this was a good example of that.
Well, and Danny didn't have Irving's help to get him into University of Chicago. I didn't have those issues coming out of college and wanting to go to business school here. I had no problem having Irving write a letter. You know, to get me in there. So it all kind of worked.
Like I said, if it, all of the stuff that happened had to have happened in order for us all to be here right now.
Danny, maybe could you share the story of how you thought about founding USAG? Did you know you always wanted to be in hospitality growing up?
No, I never knew that. As a matter of fact, after I graduated Trinity with a degree in political science, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So the big thing I knew was that I wanted to spend some time in New York City. Because during my time, I'm from St. Louis originally, and during my time at Trinity, I kept being drawn to the energy of New York. I just loved it. I loved a typical weekend for me would be hearing some jazz, seeing a Broadway show, going to the art museum, going to the horse races at Belmont Park, and going to and so 100% of the things I just said are what I do right now. We serve food in ballparks, racetracks, museums, Delta Airlines, lots of restaurants, but I never knew it. What happened was that I got a job in New York as a salesman for a company that sold electronic tags to stop shopping. I would take any job I could just to live in New York. Good salesman, and I made enough money that I kept putting my commissions into that stock. I'd never even understood really that much about how it would feel to be working in a public company. It was traded over the counter, which I think became NASDAQ after that. And during the 4 years I was there, I was their top salesman, and the stock went from 2 to 12. And when I knew that salesmen selling catching shoplifters for the rest of my life, I said, now I better get serious. I was at that point when I was, maybe some of you are at right now, where you're trying to figure out, I've already had some job, now what do I do? Well, you're getting smart, so that's thing number one. But I thought about wanting to be you, and I said, okay, I should get a master's degree, and it's either going to be in journalism or law. And my interest in those two things were kind of connected because I was very interested in politics, and I thought journalism was really interesting opportunity to learn about. So I got a job here in Chicago at WTTW, working in for the political correspondent there. And to make a long story short, I toured journalism schools, law schools, decided law. The night before taking my LSAT, I was freaking out. I went out to dinner with my aunt and uncle in New York. My grandmother was in from Chicago, and everyone was having a great dinner, great time. I still go back to this restaurant all the time. And I was in a really bad mood. My uncle, who's still alive, turned to me and said, "What is wrong with you anyway?" And I said, "Well, I have to take my LSAT tomorrow morning." He said, "Well, of course you do. You want to be a lawyer?" And I said, "No, I don't." But he got so mad at me, and he asked me the single best question anyone's ever asked me in my whole life. He said, "Do you have any idea how long you're going to be dead?" I said, "I actually hadn't thought about that. Why?" And he said, "I don't know either, but I'll tell you one thing, you're going to be dead a hell of a lot longer than you're going to be alive. Why would you do something with your life that you don't want to do?" And I said, "Because I have no idea what else I could do." And it took that night, he was the one that said, "You got to be kidding me. All I've ever heard you talk about your entire life is restaurants and food." It had never, ever dawned on me that this was a valid career choice, having had a liberal arts education. That's just not what people used to think about back then. And I took my LSAT, never applied to one law school, probably because my scores sucked. Um, but I like to tell the story differently. I didn't want to be a lawyer. Um, And I
I consider the law school at University of Chicago. I know someone that could help you there.
I was too proud, you know that. So anyway, I'm just very, very lucky, and I hope all of you get lucky to be able to know what your passion is. Mine was staring me in the face, right under my nose. I was in complete denial. Just because it was not the thing I should do, didn't mean it wasn't the thing that I should do. You know what I mean?
But a little known fact about Danny is that Danny has the food version of perfect pitch in the music world, where Danny can remember meals we ate in college 40, almost 50 years ago and say, you ordered this, we had this wine, yours needed more salt, mine needed more pepper. And you can recall everything you've ever eaten, who ate with you and what was good. And it's amazing. And when you travel with Danny, we go to 3 places for lunch and 4 places for dinner, and I can do that for a day because my metabolism works a lot slower than Danny's. But it's always an adventure, and it's been like that since we were 18 years old.
So did you know when you were college roommates that you would work professionally together?
And it was
That didn't actually happen until about 8 or 9 or 10. I can't even.
about 10 years ago. I was having dinner with Danny, and I said, at the end of the year, I'm going to go join a big private equity firm running their TMT group. And Danny said, I'm thinking about getting into private equity. So I looked at him like he had 2 heads. He said,
Was
how
I?
does that work?
I was really thinking of that.
He said, that's what me, you were humoring me, maybe. So we started talking, and then I said, you've made all these investments, but I know, you're not a finance guy. How do you know if something's overpriced or underpriced? And how do you structure it? He looked at me like I had 2 heads. Like, he goes, what are you talking about? I find entrepreneurs I find compelling, and I give them more than they're asking for. I thought, oh my God, we could be dangerous. So that's really how this started. I think we've got complementary skills through my years in investment banking and Danny's years in the food space. We used to compete as to who was a better chef, and this started about 4 or 5 years ago again. And I said, this really isn't fair. When we were in college, this was a reasonable fight. This is not a reasonable thing to
Now
consider.
we compete to see who can bring out the better bottle of wine to go with my better food.
Maybe could you
And
say
you
a little
usually
bit,
win that, so that's good.
what is Enlightened Hospitality? I mean, just so how is USAG structured? Where does
Yeah.
this fit within that?
Yeah, I want to tell that story because I think that's a great question. We have what I call the most exciting ecosystem because Union Square Hospitality just to extend Enlightened Hospitality to create amazing dining experiences really across the board. It can be a 2-star Michelin restaurant like the Modern, 1-star Michelin restaurant like Gramercy Tavern, a no Michelin star restaurant like Union Square Cafe, Shitsiamo. But we also created 11 Madison Park. Can I just show everybody your sweatshirt there? Come on, you asked for it. Which became a 4-star restaurant. We created Tabla, which was a groundbreaking 3-star New York Times Indian restaurant. Daily Provisions, we've just opened our 9th in New York City, so that's growing. So we see a lot of different parts of the business. What's amazing about, and I'll explain Enlightened Hospitality, what that means in a second, but I also want to just get back to Enlightened Hospitality Investments. We have this incredible ecosystem where we are a rare private equity firm that is also connected to an operational company. And so what it means a couple things. That if someone wants us to use their tech product, let's say, they don't product. We show it to Enlightened Hospitality Investments. And if it's a really, really compelling product that we want to get behind and use, then chances are good if it's a really gifted leadership team there, that we're going to want to get behind it and provide some strategic growth capital for them as well. But that can also happen with restaurants that come to us and they say, we want to learn, like, what did you do at Shake Shack? How did you go from, we only had one Shake Shack for the first 5 years. So all the growth Shake Shack happened in the last 15 years. But people are interested in that story, how they might benefit, not just restaurants. It could be, one of the investments we made this past year was a company called Studs, an ear piercing business. Has nothing to do with food, obviously, but it's a business that cares deeply. And now I'll talk about Enlightened Hospitality. That means all of our investments, whether they're in tech, food tech, ear piercing, Clear was one of our investments. Maybe you've seen that in the airport. What they all have in common is that they are businesses that believe that the best way to drive the best outcomes for your investor is to realize that all businesses have the exact same 5 stakeholders. And if you believe in the power of a virtuous cycle, well know what a vicious cycle is, where one bad thing keeps leading to something even worse. In a virtuous cycle, one good thing keeps leading to something better. And so our philosophy is that the thing you really want to be great should not be the input in a virtuous cycle, right? So there are many businesses, in fact, I think, pretty sure Milton Friedman went here, right?
I used to argue with this thesis of Danny's because in those days, saying you take care of your employees first, it was always you take care of the shareholders first. I said to Danny, I'm not sure you're right about this. And the reality is the world has come completely around to Danny's theory that to drive the best returns for shareholders, you got to start, because you have unhappy employees, it all falls apart.
Right. So our first stakeholder in our priority, it's not a totem pole where the investors are at the bottom and the employees are at the top, but the employees are the input. We believe that we will not have measurably better results than how jazzed people are to work on that team at that business. So we start with our employees. Happy employees directly correlated to happier customers. We can fake it once or twice, but if your team morale is bad, you're going to end up feeling that. The third stakeholder we call them guests, but after our guests, our customers, is the community. We want that community to be thrilled when we open a restaurant. Our fourth stakeholder are our suppliers. It could be food suppliers, it could be the plumber, it could be anybody we do business with. And then our fifth stakeholder are our investors. And happy investors tend to re-up. And what that means is that our employees get raised in promotions. So if you break this virtuous cycle anywhere, you break the whole thing. But it truly works. And that is our thesis for how we invest in businesses at EHI, irrespective of whether they can improve. Now, what Mark and the really incredible team we have done a fantastic job of is realizing that the thesis of EHI is that because we're not just a private equity firm, but in fact we connect to this whole other ecosystem, we can usually get really, really favorable pricing. But maybe even more importantly than that, we get a very early look at many, many deals. And if you're a baseball player and you got to look at a lot more pitches before you had to swing the bat, we can look at a lot of pitches and not strike out.
We see about 80 companies for every one we invest. There's out of 28 investments, only one time has there been an intermediary in the middle. It's all very proprietary deal flow. We're paying 20 to 30% less than others, but I think because they want our strategic value. And we used to debate where does hospitality start and stop? And part of my University of Chicago training came to root when I realized that over time, we would make offers to companies. My strong belief is we need to deliver. People give us capital on attractive prices for us because they believe our strategic value has value to them. So we spent a lot of time outlining this is where we can help. As part of the ecosystem Danny was describing, we've got people in our LP base like Compass Group, which is the biggest food service company in the world. We've got a couple of the big Shake Shack licensing partners. We've got Fiserv First Data, who processes 80% of the credit card receipts in the world. and has made a big push into the food area. So this kind of ecosystem community really helps drive what we do. But I think when I look at it, say, what's the secret sauce is we're highly differentiated from any other private equity firm out there. To start with, 2/3 of the companies we backed have female or other underrepresented groups as founders and CEOs. And our investment team looks like that. In an industry that for too long has been a bunch of white males, we've half our investment team is female. It's a third black. It's really a diverse group, and we're firm believers that that's a winning strategy. We don't need people that have had our exact experiences agreeing with us. We've tried to build this with a really flat organizational structure to get the benefit of having a diverse group of people working for us. And the challenge has really been to get them not to be afraid to speak. You know, we found you can have a bright group of diverse kids, and in a flat structure, we say, this, we're never going to be a place where we say, we got rid of so-and-so because their deals weren't good. If the deals weren't good, that was on all of us. We all put our hands in and say, we like this, or we don't proceed. Because you lose people's money and you say, we got rid of them, we did bad deals. You're the LP in the fund. You don't care. You lost the same, we lost the same amount of your money. So I really feel like this flat structure has worked well for us, and we're continuing to refine it and get better at it, I think, with each rep. And I kind of look at Fund 1 and Fund 2, and Fund 1 has done very well. But I think Fund 2 is going to be better. And someone asked me why. And I said, I think the reality is we were a first-time fund with no track record or experience. And we've learned, and really what we've learned is there's points where we can push and be a lot more aggressive than we have. As a minority investor, we now have rights in everything in Fund 2 to force a sale of the company after a certain period.
Mark,
of
that's a
time.
really important point. I know you've got a lot more questions to get to, but part of our strategy is that, with only one exception, which was the very first investment we made, Go Coffee, we are minority investors. We don't want to go do turnarounds. But I think it's, with being a minority investor, you get some benefits, which is, as Mark has said, some favorable pricing going in. But there's also some challenges because unless we really get smart with some of the governance, we don't usually carry the day based on votes. So we have to be really good at persuading and coaching founders
And there's
where
usually,
they want to go the direction.
and there's usually one or two other constituencies we're dealing with. For sure, one is the founder, and there's usually one or two other investors that we're kind of jockeying with to make sure that it gets done the right way.
Yeah. Maybe could we talk about the pandemic and sort of how did that change the business, and did that make you go into new lines of business that you wouldn't?
It's ironic you asked about the pandemic, because the last time we did this was 5 years ago on March 15th. It was the day it was like the day the world was coming to an end. I remember Danny singing happy birthday, washing his hands in the men's room at O'Hare. In those days, they said you should wash your hands long enough to sing happy birthday. So he was in there.
Twice. You only saying it once, you didn't get rid of all the, as if that was going to stop the pandemic.
So I think the quick answer is the tech, half our fund is tech, the kind of software dealing with pain points in hospitality. That stuff exploded in value. Companies like Goldbelly were up 500% during that period of time. Madison Reed. So the tech stuff really went up in value. We probably lost 2 years certainly on the fast casual spots in the food space. And CPG, it was probably net neutral. More people were at home cooking. And in CPG, we've got Bonzo, we've got Oats Overnight, we've got Culture Pop.
But we didn't
have those in the pandemic.
those.
No, all we had, I guess really all we had was Bonzo during that.
Yeah.
And they actually grew during that period of time.
And then in the restaurant business, it was awful. I mean, we came that close to going out of business because we were not allowed to be in business. And it's really, really hard to reconcile being a business that says we put our people first. The only way to survive is to lose 90% of your company. It accelerated a few things, and if you're sitting in some remote location, which I was, because no one wanted to be in Manhattan, which is kind of like ground zero for this. It was depressing to even think about coming into the city. Boarded up windows, no restaurants. It was absolutely awful. We did one thing that I'd say daily provisions without question accelerated its ability to have an app, digital ordering. We were not really a takeaway business until the pandemic happened. So, odd way, it was helpful to daily provisions to grow up quickly. Shake Shack, which I talked about separately because it's a separate public company, was very, very quick to adapt to that stuff as well. The one thing we did that was, we hoped it was going to have a great outcome, and it didn't really, was we started a SPAC during the pandemic. Everybody was starting a SPAC. And we succeeded at raising a lot of money. Our SPAC was public on the New York Stock Exchange. And the best thing I can say is that it was like my version of doing what you guys are all doing, which was we got a lot of business case studies, talking to a lot of CEOs and CFOs and CMOs of companies that we said, you guys are doing something pretty cool, and trying to figure out if it was a cultural fit as well. You have 2 years to complete a SPAC. We did a very, very unusual deal that we thought was going to happen, and that was with Panera Bread. Panera at that point was going out as 3 brands. Panera Bagels, there's Brugger's Bagels, and what's the other one? I forget. And Caribou Coffee. Bagel brands, it's called. So we actually had a deal. Panera had been a very successful public company. It was brought private by a big firm called JAB of Germany. And JAB, in the intermittent years, Panera's performance was not very good. Raise your hand if you like Panera better today than you did 10 years ago.
Has anyone ever eaten in Panera here?
Yes,
All right.
but I didn't
Okay.
see one hand go up and said you like it better today. So they've really underperformed, and therein was an opportunity for us, but also a challenge. The opportunity was that JAB said, we want your SPAC to come in. We're going to bring this public again, and your SPAC is going to be on the cover. It's not going to be a SPAC, but we're going to take your money because we want. It was almost like a really, really big league version of what we do with Enlightened Hospitality.
It was a way to get an anchor strategic investor to help their public offering. Having spent time as a banker working with SPACs, they're always broken companies that have the wrong shareholder base, and you've got to re-SPAC, get the right thing. If in your career someone approaches you with a SPAC or something with an involvement SPAC, run. Don't waste your time.
Well, anyway, we had a great deal, and it was good for the investors too, because the deal we struck, if you were an investor, you would actually have had 10 days to watch the SPAC perform. With an opening strike price of $10 a share, you'd have 10 days to decide whether you wanted to redeem it or not. So we felt, at the end of the day, I believe all of our initial investors made a couple pennies, but the company didn't go public within the 2-year window, and it still isn't public. And I hate to say it, but it seems to be more troubled than ever. And meanwhile, JAB is stuck with this pretty big investment, and I don't know what they're gonna do with it, but it won't be us. That's what we did during our pandemic. Then we find, I just have to say, it was really hard reopening our restaurants. As a matter of fact, we already had a new restaurant in the works before, like the day that we were here in 2025, we had already gotten our construction plans and everything for a new restaurant that would open in 2021 called Chisiamo. Well, it opened because it had to open, because it was like the baby had to be born, but no one in their right mind would have opened a restaurant in 2021. By the way, Chisiamo is still packed every single night. But leaving that aside, what I was going to say is, as hard as it is to open a new restaurant, it was even harder to reopen the restaurants that had been closed in some cases, in a couple cases for 2 years. And the reason is that no one had any expectations when they went to Chisiamo. No one said, what happened to my favorite waiter? What happened to my favorite bartender? Where's my favorite maitre d' that recognizes me every time I come in? Where's my favorite menu item? No one said that at the new restaurant. But because 90% of our staff was new at every one of the existing restaurants, take a restaurant like Gramercy Tavern, which just celebrated its 30th birthday this past year. You went there with expectations that it's Gramercy Tavern, and yet it felt different. And it took another 2 years to make these restaurants feel the way. Now, the good news is that I remember very, very well that we had some internal goals that we wanted our staff to look more like New York City, like the population it served. And we thought we could get that done in about 5 years when we really started focusing on it. With the pandemic, we were able to accelerate that to overnight. And I think that our team, like what you heard Mark saying about Enlightened Hospitality Investments, all of our restaurants look like the city right now. And as a result of that, the people who dine in our restaurants are much more comfortable looking like the city. And I don't, when I say diversity, I don't just mean gender and race. I also mean age. One of the things I'm proudest about is if you go to our restaurant, you go to many restaurants and it's like, these are only old people, or these are only 20 somethings or 30 somethings or whatever. And I love having restaurants that work all across age groups as well as across all other groups of diversity.
We actually were active on the investment side during the pandemic. We saw some attractive, we sold 2 businesses during the pandemic. We saw some attractive things. And I think we had more conviction that the world was going to come back at some point. So it was a good time for us to get money out.
Could you say a little bit about just sustainability and what role that plays in the books that you do?
So we have an investment in a company called Restaurant Technologies, which recycles cooking oil. And it gets recycled. It's an ESG play. This has been flipped from private equity firm to private equity firm over the years. And I've been saying there's big pools of capital committed to ESG that needs somewhere to go. This company is doing 150 million in cash flow. This would be one of the biggest things out there. And I said the public market will certainly pay a heftier price than flipping it to another private equity firm. So they're starting to focus on that. That's probably the thing.
So it's a really cool company. Shake Shack is one of their many, many, many customers, but they have almost no churn because in order to, so every restaurant that does any kind of frying has cooking oil. And what most restaurants have to do with that is to have this really messy and sometimes dangerous backbreaking exercise of carting this stuff out of the restaurant and having some truck pull up. You've probably seen these trucks pull up in front of your restaurant with a really smelly thing pumping the stuff out of your basement or whatever. And what these guys do is they actually construct the whole pump system underneath your sidewalk. No one ever sees it. And they pull a truck up and it's just gone. But as Mark was just saying, not only are staffs not breaking their backs, not only is it clean, but they actually then turn that oil into biofuel. So to your question about sustainability, it's like an end-to-end win.
They never lose a customer. Once there's 2 tanks underneath your restaurant and it's easy in and out and the pricing's competitive, you're not moving anywhere saying we want to go back to the old school of trying to drag stuff in and out of here.
So that's one. I think, I could, if you're interested, I could just talk that our restaurants obviously all care about, shouldn't say obviously, but sustainability is such a big word. I don't even know where to start with. Is it composting? Sure, do that. Is it thinking deeply about who you're buying your food from, whether it's plants or animals? Yes. Is it thinking about regenerative agriculture, how important that is in terms of where you buy? Yes. Are we LEED certified in all of our restaurants? No. It's something that we're increasingly conscious of. And I think that happily, of staff members are often the ones who are leading the charge. The chefs care deeply about it, but your question that you just asked us is a question that we get daily. How can we do better from our own teams? And I think our job is to encourage that. And then, think about where you can do it. Like, did you buy plastic cutlery that is compostable? Yes. Did that cost more money? Yes. Did you have to figure out a way to justify that? Yes. You can't. Nothing is easy. In the world of business, there's a lot of things you would do if you felt that it was the right thing to do, and that you're not going to lose your customer base because you priced the product too high in so doing. Can we bring our customers along and educate them so they see it was worth spending more money for that product because of what we did, what the changes we make cost us money to do so.
Maybe speak a little bit about how much do you use data analytics, things like that to do the decision that you do?
Since we've got a lot of Chicago people there, we're all over the numbers and the analysis. I think you've got to be very tech data savvy and comfortable. And having been a TMT banker, what I saw was the media business, the value in the media business really migrated towards the data and the information they've had. And I've had this ongoing discussion with Goldbelly saying, what's potentially more valuable than, they're the second biggest user of UPS and FedEx. I said, what's more valuable than what's really a big logistics business that owns the marketplace for food is your data, because you know who's eating what, where, what restaurants of interest. I said, it's data that's really valuable if you can figure out how to pull it out of there and market it, sell it. So we spend a lot of time with data. We invest in companies that are data forward.
And you invested in one of the restaurant reservation businesses, right? Which one?
Two.
Well, we were investors in Resi, which we sold to American Express, who made 11 and a half times our money. We're investors in a company called 7 Rooms, which is kind of the next generation reservation. And they're doing very well. Growing rap, they're over 100 million in ARR right now.
And it's an area that we've spent time in for years, way before we started EHI. This goes back to the year 2000. I made a seed investment in OpenTable.com. In fact, we launched OpenTable in New York at 11 Madison Park to introduce. It was only in San Francisco at that point, and then it became a global company. And when that was acquired, first one went public, and then as a public company was acquired, that board went away, and that's when we felt that Resi could be a next gen version. And when Resi got acquired, we said, now we believe 7 Rooms can be a next gen.
I think there's actually an interesting part of the backstory to all this, which is when OpenTable started, Danny was an investor. I remember having a discussion with you saying, why do you need to pay them X amount for a table? You've got the hardest restaurant to get a seat at. It was just Union Square at the time. And Danny said, I don't need them to fill the seats. I need them to get the data because I want to know who's coming. And you were so ahead of the curve of us saying, I need to know my customer and I need to connect dots with my customer. And it was that interest that I think really drove your desire to play OpenTable.
Before, so OpenTable was founded in 1999. And in 1994, I actually incorporated a business called MD Inc. I didn't do a damn thing with it, but one of our regular guests at Union Square Cafe back then was a tech freak. He ended up just being a freak.
It often goes down that path.
And the other one who joined us was an advertising genius, and he was both. So the reason I did this was before we had the internet. So back then, my goal was not to have real-time online reservations from anywhere. I didn't even know what that meant. My goal, as Mark just said, was that I was pretty much a prisoner of my own restaurants because I cared so deeply about connecting as many dots as I could so that every guest who walked in would say, I feel seen, I feel known, I feel recognized. And so what MD Inc. was going to do was to simply be a database. So instead of a paper and pencil reservation book like we all grew up with, at least like we all grew up with, this was going to be an opportunity that every time we took a reservation, it went into a database. And whether it was my night off, or not, whoever was the maitre d', that was the MD, obviously, not doctor. Whoever was the maitre d' would have all the information about that guest history, where they like to sit, what they like to eat, who their favorite server is, when their birthday is, all that kind of stuff. So I didn't do it, but that, Mark, you're absolutely right. And then there, in this year, 1999-ish, it was like a tsunami of 5 or 6 companies all trying to take this idea that I had had years ago and done nothing with, but adapt it for the internet. And that was really my first ever investment. Because what I had to do was they all came to me with terms I had never heard of in my life. I didn't know what an angel investor was. I didn't know what valuation meant. We didn't do that in the 4-wall restaurant business. We just ran our restaurants and hoped
I
that.
find compelling entrepreneurs and give more than they're asking for.
So, I was lucky that I picked the one that ended up winning. And
It was not a smooth ride, though. I mean, they could have gone out of business 4 times.
yep,
It
and I
ended up
had to
being a
have the
big win, but-
conviction to
yeah.
re-up and not, because I didn't want to get diluted by all these newcomers. And American Express was one of the early ones who invested. The Zagat survey was one of the ones, and they didn't play in subsequent rounds, but it was another, I said the SPAC was my version of business school. This was my version of business school. We had an amazingly smart board, a guy named Bill Gurley, who's pretty famous as a tech investor, venture capital tech investor. A guy named Adam Dell, whose brother founded a little computer company, Michael Dell. Had a woman who was the CMO of Amazon, which was a new company back then. And I just was like, I was learning stuff. If you're in the restaurant business only, as I was at that point, as I said, it's a 4-wall business, and your idea of success was, did you maximize your seatings? I didn't know anything about this other world where if you have the right idea, literally the opportunity is infinite. There are no walls. You can just grow and grow and grow. And we had to change out the founding CEO. That was within the first year. I'd never done anything like that. And we had to change out the next CEO. I'd never done anything like that.
You've changed chefs, so you know how to do that. You know when the fit's not right, actually.
Yeah, you're right.
You're sometimes more patient than I am on these things, but
Anyway, it was a great education.
So maybe a little gothic question about 11 Madison Park. Were you responsible for making it vegan?
No, I'm happy to share the story, which is that I started the restaurant in 1998 and owned it until 2011. And in its earlier years, it was a beloved restaurant, but I never thought it was as excellent as it could have been. I undershot how beautiful the restaurant was going to be. I wanted to make a delicious version of a French brasserie. And it turned out that the restaurant, brasserie, if you've ever been to one in Paris or Lyon, they're really fun. 11 Madison Park was way more beautiful than it was fun. And so instead of people saying, this is the best food I've ever had in a brasserie, they said, this is the most middle of the road food I've ever had in a grand restaurant. And so after getting at least 2 different 2-star reviews from the New York Times, when my aspiration was that it should be a 3-star restaurant. It should be excellent. And it was right next door to Tabla, which had 3 stars. So we always felt like we were undershooting our own potential. And I scoured the country along with one of my partners, Richard Corain, for the right chef. We came up with a guy from San Francisco named Daniel Hume. He's a young Swiss chef cooking at the Campton Place Hotel, and brought him to New York. And within a couple of years, the restaurant. We also brought in Will Gadara, who had been manager of our cafes at MoMA, and convinced him, Will's dad is a very successful guy from fast casual world. He had been CEO of Bon Pain. He had been trying to think of what they all were, but he wanted Will to go to Shake Shack, which was brand new, which came out of 11 Madison Park. And I said, Will, I see what your gifts are as a leader in our cafes at MoMA. Why don't you come partner with Chef here to be the general manager? And I finally convinced Will to listen to me and set it to his own dad. And Will and Daniel together formed an amazing partnership. And first we got 3 stars from the New York Times, and then we got 4 stars from the New York Times, and then we got 3 stars from Michelin and a grand award from the Wine Spectator. And those guys were getting offers left and right to do their own thing. And it was very, very painfully clear to me that I did not want to be, and they invited me to come along with them. They were going to open a place called the Nomad Hotel. I said, I can't be your partner and your rival at the same time. I don't know how to have those 2 relationships. And I don't want to fire you. And so the only real option, because this restaurant is now what you want it to be. And I said, I don't know anything else we can go. Where else can we go? By the way, I never wanted to have a 4-star restaurant. I'm much more about 3 stars. I like excellence more than perfection. I don't think
You're a root at dive diner. I mean, you like hole in the wall spots.
I like,
And you're in,
I don't like the pursuit of perfection. I think it's a recipe for unhappiness because I don't think there's any such thing as perfection. But, hats off to I said, what are you guys going to do with this? They got a buyer. That was in 2011. And they looked at each other, they smiled, and they said, we're going to make this restaurant #1 in the world. And they bought it. They made it #1 in the world in Restaurant Magazine thing. And then those guys had a falling out. And now it was just Daniel on his own. And he got the religion of being vegan and wanting to make the vegan. So way after we were out. And I think they're doing well. I've gone back once, twice, 3 times since we sold it. Once when Alinea, Chicago restaurant, came in to do a night there. And I've been in the private dining room once, which they had to change because once it became vegan, it's one thing for a couple to go out or force them to go out and say, we're going to eat vegan tonight. But if you're hosting a private party for 30, 40, 50 people, it's not that easy to convince 30, 40, 50 people that they all want to eat vegan. So in the last year, Daniel has converted the private room into a bar, which is really smart. Because at the bar, you can have vegan snacks, but great cocktails. So anyway, long answer to your question, but
Great, so thank
it
you.
wasn't, I'm not the vegan guy.
You're not the vegan. Right, so I'm going to open it up for audience questions. If anyone wants to ask anything for Daniel, Mark.
Right.
Yeah.
So in your virtue cycle, it seems to really start with the employee. In the virtue cycle, it seems to really start with the employee. How do you keep the employees happy or jazzed up in the when they're very often in very tough positions?
You hold. It took me a long time to figure this out, but it's not my job to make anyone happy. I can't. What I can do is we work really hard on creating teams where the thing that you're really happy about is that you get to work with other people from whom you can learn, other people with whom you can develop trust, mutual trust and respect. And then we hold our team members accountable for how they treat each other. In the old days, I thought it was all about me. And as we grew, I said, first of all, I can't make all these people happy. And there's not enough of me to go around anyway. I got to make me happy sometime. So now what we've really figured out is the best thing we can do is to give you someone, no matter how, everyone's job is tough. The bookkeeper's job is tough. The line cook's job is tough, but it can also be fun. And we call these teams, they're hospitality teams. We believe hospitality is a team sport. You don't, we're very, very clear on the behaviors that we expect. And I have really come to believe that the way you can determine the culture of any organization is by looking at all the wanted behaviors that they celebrate minus all the unwanted behaviors that they tolerate. And that ends up being the culture of the place. And we've just gotten much, much better at holding people accountable for those behaviors. The most important of which is that when you come to work, we challenge everyone. So we want you to be the single biggest reason people like working on this. You, not the restaurant itself, not the chef, not Danny, not Mark, but your job, no matter what it is to be part of why everybody else loves coming to work. And that really helps. The other thing, we do some other cool things. You know, we have a philosophy that we want to have 100% employees, just like any employee would want us to be a 100% employer. And we're very, very clear where you get 100%. The most points you're going to get for how good you are at the thing you do, whether it's being a cook or a sommelier, maitre d', the most points you're going to get for what you do is 49. That leaves 51 points for who are you while you're doing it, which is the hospitality. So 49 points for technical excellence, 51 points for emotional hospitality excellence. And to reinforce that, that becomes part of your performance review, both sides of that. Further reinforce it, everyone on our team gets a 51% discount whenever they dine at any of our restaurants in exchange for telling us what we need to do to get better. So it's just like constantly reinforcing the same thing.
There was a period of time when I first joined Danny where you would hear that we want to hire 51 percenters. And I think what we found is you hire nice people that sometimes are not competent and you tolerate it because they're 51% or so. You really, it's really the mix as Danny just described it. But I think early on there was an enthusiasm to get people that were nice. And sometimes they weren't that good at what they were doing.
And that's when we really shifted our focus. So we want a 100% employee because you can hire the best emotional skills in the world, but if they can't do their job well, you're not going to get the benefit of their emotional skills anyway. It was like, quick example, I have to give this. I learned how to drive a stick shift car, maybe on Mark's little VW once.
It was my mother's I took to school. So of course you can experiment with it.
You know, it's hard to find a stick shift car these days, but if you've ever, raise your hand if you've ever tried it in your life. It's going to be about, oh, wow. Where do you find these cars? All right. So for those of you who did it, let's say you're the greatest storyteller in the world and you love good music and you love nature. Okay. You're sitting there learning how to figure out what do you do with your left foot, your right hand, right? You're worried about going backwards into the car in back of you when you first learn to drive it, right? You're not telling stories to your friends. You're not switching the radio dial to get better music. You're not pointing out the beautiful scenery. You're just trying to get the technical stuff down. And so to Mark's point, that's when we coined what we call the swan theory, which is that if you ever seen a little baby swan, it's called a cygnet. They're these little gray things, and they don't know how to swim yet. And they don't look like swans. They're swimming in circles. The mother swan has to teach the cygnets how to swim. That's the technical stuff. Till she does that, you're not going to get any of the hospitality stuff, which is the gracefulness of what swans happen to be mean animals, but but when you're a kid,
Everyone saw the Curb Your Enthusiasm about the black swan.
when you see a swan and you're a little kid, you're getting all the hospitality, right? 51% of the swan's body mass is above the water, doing all that stuff, making you feel good. 49% of the swan's body mass is beneath the water, doing all the technical stuff. And unless we focus on getting a 100% employee, we're gonna be swimming in circles because we don't have the technical skills down, and you're not gonna get any of the beauty. We're gonna be a bunch of signets out there. So we've learned that way.
I thought it was interesting when I first started working with Danny, and we were trying to figure out what culture, what kind of culture do these organizations we're investing in have. I remember we were looking at a chain out in San Francisco, and Danny said, I don't want them to know that I'm here. I want to just walk in. And he said, I could sit there and watch the way the employees interact with each other and know whether there's good management driving that.
I remember what I had for lunch that day. It was,
Of course.
in and of itself, that wasn't good enough either. And the guy came out and knew us
And
anyway.
yeah, right, it was.
Oh, yeah.
I can speak loudly. So
Thank you. So it's pretty clear, the investments that you made on the tech side at EHI and how you may be able to implement that at Union Square Hospitality Group. Where do you draw the line between, say, some of the more CPG focused or kind of other hospitality concepts, like O's or Culture Pop, and like the exposure that they might want at some of your restaurants?
We're really clear with people up front that that cannot be the, that's not the foundation of our investment that we will use it. We wouldn't be interested in investing if we couldn't imagine one day we might, but some of them have nothing to do with our restaurants anyway. So Bonza is a very good example. Chicken pasta, we're not using that in any of our restaurants, but nor was that, you know, one of the terms of the investment in the first place. That doesn't mean we can't get behind it and promote it. That doesn't mean we didn't try, you know, when they came out with a chickpea
crust.
pizza crust. And we, at that point, had a pizza restaurant called Marta. We gave it a shot. We even tried, you know, deep frying it and turning them into panelle, Chinese chickpea fritters. So we'll always try. Sometimes it works out great. So we use Joe Coffee in all of our restaurants, including Daily Provisions. I think we've been really good for their business, and they've been really good for our business as well. But it's not a prerequisite at all.
So going off of the CPG companies, when you're evaluating those companies and debating whether to include them as part of your portfolio, what are you looking for in those companies? And do you look at more the founder and saying like, that's a founder that I want to give more money than they're asking for? I'm curious what that process is like.
I'm gonna say one thing and I'll
Go
let
ahead.
Mark answer. First thing is, well, we have this theory we call the shopping cart theory. And here it's almost literal.
It works.
But the shopping cart theory is that when you go to a grocery store and you're the next in line and you're watching the person in front of you taking all the stuff out of their shopping cart, whether you will acknowledge it or not, you are making some value judgment. Like, we don't buy that stuff. That's a weird family. But, and you know, that family's not weird. That's just how they eat. And it's the kind of stuff they buy. The shampoos, difference in the shampoo, whatever, but that's their profile. And so we realize the person in back of us is also looking at our shopping cart. And we're conscious about what that shopping cart says about us and the choices we make on our investments. So now if you want to get really literal about it, if we're investing in a CPG company where you eat the product, first thing is we gotta say, this is something we would actually love to eat or drink. Because if we don't want it, that's a killer.
We get a lot of bad tasting stuff that gets sent to our
A
office
lot,
every day.
a lot.
It's shocking how much junk people send into us.
And some of it's really interesting. You know, we had a company who was growing meat cells in a laboratory, and then they come to the office and they cook it. And it's an interesting idea that what if we could, like, for example, if they were really successful, maybe we wouldn't be worried about the chicken virus or whatever, because they've been grown from cells safely, but it was yucky. It was really awful. And the beef product was even worse. So first we have to love it, then we have to analyze what do we think is the TAM of that business sector, right? So oats overnight. Are people really, do we have conviction that that product actually, no matter who makes it, has legs? Then do we have conviction that this is a leader in that category? It may not be number one, I think Culture Pop is a good example of that.
Culture Pop, yeah, we were number 3 behind Olipop and Poppy, both of which we looked at, thought the pricing didn't make sense. And we invested in this one because it was back to your question about the founder. It was backed by a guy who started Nantucket Nectars and sold it to Keurig Dr. Pepper for a lot of money. And what really put him on the map was Starbucks rolled it out. So we invested in around in his new company, which is Culture Pop. Culture Pop. They have horrible names in this industry. They all sound like Pop, Poppy, Culture Pop. It's like, hey, come on.
You're from the Midwest, isn't that what you call soda?
Poppy.
Didn't I just hear that?
This is a Boston guy doing this. Anyway, we had real conviction around him, and the other investor in our round was Howard Schultz from Starbucks' family office. So hoping he can do it
But to
again.
answer your question, first fall in love with the product, then have conviction that the category has legs, then have conviction that the leadership has legs to grow with this thing, and then crunch a bunch of numbers.
And you know what, at the end of the day, we can like it, not like it. What really makes it work is, did we pick the right founder to back? And that's the challenge. You know, I found over my years in investment banking, a good management team can take a bad situation and salvage it, make it good. Bad management can screw up the best opportunities. So we get better at this, but it's really an imperfect science as to how you evaluate their ability to take things. And I found we back a lot of promising entrepreneurs, and they get it to a certain point. The rare exceptions say, I'm going to hire people that are smarter than me and get someone that can take it to the next level. Most of them say, I've got this. Yeah, and if you wait too long, you find they start hurting value over the time because they're in over their heads and they don't want to make that tough choice.
We got a question over there.
So I know that private equity often gets a bad rap when it comes to restaurant groups, and in some of the news we've seen, it doesn't always go the best way. But for a company like Slutty Vegan, where you have Pinky, who's this relentless founder, has this vision of how she wants it to grow, how are you able to sort of support and reassure the founder that you guys are the right people to back her and that the growth will be complementary rather than some of the scary stories that she may have seen outside of her own business?
So if you were one of our limited partners, you would see that we had marked down the value of our investment in that to 0. This has been the worst investment we've made. It's been the only one we've lost money. And there's a whole series of mistakes we made, and we obviously learned from them, but it didn't work. And we didn't pick the right entrepreneurs back at that point.
Yeah, but I don't think private equity, to your question, I don't think private equity is the issue. We were not the lead investor in that, but I think we really, I believe we did everything we could to help her. And, but at the end of the day, the entrepreneur, the founder, is going to listen or not, and we are a minority investor. And I think we had a lot that we could have offered her, but it just didn't work. I think the pricing was off. So it turned out to be a very expensive product. And I think the store designs, most of the restaurants didn't have bathrooms, but nor did they have
Or seating.
or seating. And so it was a very limited audience that could appreciate it.
It worked really well in Atlanta because it's warm. You can sell alcohol there. It was like Shake Shack. There was long lines, and it was a party, and it was festive. And it wasn't something that was really transportable. In New York City, people don't want to stand in a line outside with no place to sit in the wintertime, to buy expensive food and have no place to eat it. So there was stuff that was, in retrospect, obvious, and we missed it.
Well, we're sort of out of time. Maybe I'll end with asking a question. I'm sure you've seen the show about on Hulu about the Chicago restaurant, the Bear. Any thoughts on that? Is that realistic? Not realistic?
Well, it gets me very nervous. It's very upsetting, that show. It's because I feel like I've spent my entire career trying to create environments that are not like that. It's genuine. It's really good. It's really good TV, really good acting, really good writing, but it's not the only way. It was actually, one of the reasons I wrote the book that many of you have in your hands here is I had just read Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. And from a literary standpoint, his book is a lot more like The Bear. And it got me so upset. I just wanted to say, okay, but that's not the only way. And that's kind of how I've tried to lead the business. But it really gets me upset watching that show. Don't do that. Don't talk to people that way.
Not smart.
I haven't watched it. I feel like I get enough of this during my daytime, and it's on my to-do list, but I haven't gotten there yet.
It's okay. It's okay.
So yeah, I just want to thank Danny and Mark for coming. Please give them a warm.
I want to thank you guys. You've been an amazing audience. And I'm
Thank
going to
you.
apologize in advance. I'm a little late getting to the airport, or I would have wanted to meet every one of you right here. But it's been really great. And thanks for all the
So
great
much Danny,
questions,
for coming.
partner. I'll see you
I-
back in New York.
I hope you make it. It's Southwest out of Midway, that may be a better option.
No, I've already been told that Midway is worse than O'Hare.
I don't like that we do the